What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with reactions to the classics, and today I got another reaction to Marillion, this time to their album Seasons End. And if you've been with us a long time or join our live streams, you know who this is for. But for those of you that don't, for our friend, longtime supporter, and patron of the channel, Joseph, actor JSB, appreciate him, appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out the Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. Well, to say that Joseph knows a lot about Marillion would be the understatement of the year, so I will let him handle all of this. He's one of my very favorite people on this channel. So I look forward to doing this one. He said, well, it's been a long time since I had to review Clutching at Straws. Check that out after this. The final Phish era album, and first in my personal favorite 5-album run in music history. I've been patiently waiting for the band to complete the issuing of the deluxe edition box sets of their 8 EMI albums. They finally completed the job recently at the release of Seasons End, so we can now go through those first 4 H-era albums. Now, we're going to listen to the original mix just to clarify that. Let's rewind a bit to late summer 1988. Increasingly at odds with band members and management, Phish has written a 5-page letter to the band, intended as a discussion point as to changes that he felt should be made if he were to remain in the band, including the removal of John Arneson as the band's manager and an increase in his share of the publishing money from an equal share to 50%, in fact. Shortly after this, he received a terse message from the band's management, quite possibly Arneson himself, saying, "The band have decided to accept your resignation." Word spread quickly, and the music and wider press effectively surmised that Phish would continue as a successful solo artist and the band would never be heard from again. But they had other ideas, because that's what usually happens, right? A fair amount of new material had been worked up in the dying days of the Phish era, and they continued to write music while beginning the search for a new singer. Realizing they were also in need of a new lyricist and deciding finding someone who was both a great singer and lyricist would be too much to hope for, they began a long working relationship with John Helmer, a member of Brighton-based ska band The Piranhas. An unlikely source, perhaps, I would say so. But as Steve Rothery recalls, I came across some of John's lyrics and thought there was something special about them. He was someone who could come up with something lyrically interesting, but different again from Phish. Finding a suitable lyricist had proved relatively easy, but the search for a singer was taking somewhat longer, with many hopefuls rejected for a variety of reasons. Meanwhile, a singer by the name of Steve Hogarth is suffering from industry burnout. He spent much of the 80s in 2 bands. Firstly, the Europeans, who recorded 3 albums, including a live release that represented their commercial peak, by which I mean it spent a week at 100 in the charts. Hey, but you were on the charts, right? Later in the decade, he and Europeans guitarist Colin War split to become the duo How We Live. Their first and only album, 1987's Dry Land, had similarly sank without a trace. In the process of starting a family, Hogarth is seriously considering leaving the music industry altogether. Hoping to take on some odd jobs to tide him over, he visited his publishers and asked if anybody had anything needing doing. Someone pipes up with, Marillion are looking for a new vocalist. Yeah, I didn't mean that, he says, but they persuade him to send in his demo tape. By this time, Ian Mosley has taken on the role of potential vocalist vetter, playing demos in his car on his way to rehearsals in Pete Trewavis's house. As he notes, usually after a minute or so, I take the cassette out, throw it over my shoulder into the back seat. Then one day I put it in a cassette and Steve Hogarth's voice came out. I was very excited about it. I got to Pete's and played the cassette to the boys, and the reaction was unanimous. We thought this was the bloke. A swiftly arranged audition cemented in the band's collective consciousness that they had found their man, but Hogarth took some persuading, which the band were somewhat nonplussed by at the time. You can imagine that. Nonetheless, they agreed to Hogarth's suggestion that rather than signing straight away, they should spend some time writing and recording together to see if their different musical backgrounds and personalities had potential to gel in the long term. Within a few weeks, they had practically completed the writing for what was to become the Seasons End album. So you got to admire H there, right? He's looking for jobs. He's doing side jobs. But instead of jumping in and signing and standing on, he's the one being cautious here. So I actually respect that a lot. What they didn't have at this point, and what Hogarth didn't discover until years later, was a firm record contract. Yeah, I could see not wanting to mention that. Officially, they were still signed to EMI, but with Phish's departure and subsequent signing to EMI as a solo act, the label were well within their rights to drop the band. As Pete recounts, quote, the record company had already signed Phish, and they decided they couldn't sign us until they heard something. That was a bit of a blow to us, as it felt like they didn't trust us. I don't think they realized the importance of the music and thought Marillion was Phish and a few musicians. I don't think they've quite understood the importance of our part in the makeup of the band. When they heard the demos and heard Steve, who had a bit more of a commercial voice, they got quite excited and signed us. The band, with Hogarth now on board as the official fifth member, moved into Hooked In Studios in late April, remaining there until July for recording what proved an idyllic time for all, especially their new, no longer reluctant frontman. He said, "I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. The sun came out and never went away. I'd sit by the swimming pool and teams of young girls would come out and give me Pims and club sandwiches." The band had selected a young engineer named Nick Davis to co-produce the album with them, a first for the band and Davis's first production job before moving on to some very big things in the future. Crucially, he had worked as an engineer on Clutching at Straws. As Trawavis explains, quote, "We felt that we could get great results and we wouldn't have that feeling of the record company bringing in a producer who would be pushing us in a certain way." Davis himself adds, "It was some continuity that they could control and we got on great. I think it was on the same music level as those guys. It was just about getting great performances out of people. And I think we did. The joy of making the album has gone to be one of the highlights of my career." While post-Fish, Marillion would never scale the same commercial heights that they had achieved with their frontman. The same being true, only even more so for Fish's solo career, by the way. Seasons In had a positive critical and commercial reception, reaching number 7, becoming certified silver and eventually gold, while creating a solid foundation for which to continue their career, which has continued unabated with the same lineup firmly in place now for 34 years and counting, which is just amazing. Album track by track, the bulk of the quotes below are culled from the Seasons End documentary on the new deluxe edition, which just released this year. But some come from earlier interviews, past reissues, liner notes, etc., because my man Joseph knows what it's about in the research game. The music will not be in this video, but it will be at a Vimeo link below. So click on that link and follow on with us. Let's kick it off. The album opener, The King of Sunset Town. Joseph says the band teased the arrival of the new singer on this opening track, making listeners wait a full 2.5 minutes before hearing his first words, with the longest build in a career, not short on slow build opening tracks. Steve Rothery calls this, quote, "an exciting way to signal the rebirth of the band," while Mark explains this was partly done to ease fans in. "We wanted to open the album with something that wasn't a big surprise, so they wouldn't hear it and go, 'Don't like that,' within the first 2 minutes." That's a great idea. I don't suppose we consciously thought about that while we were writing it, but certainly when we ordered songs on the album, you think about those kinds of things, like what's somebody going to hear first? Certainly when the track does burst into life with a Steve Rothery solo, you feel fans with any trepidation about the band's new lineup would have had most of their fears erased by the time they got to hear a note from Steve H. This was actually the first song the band ever played together, as an early version of the lyrics were presented to H at his audition with the instruction to, quote, "Try singing these over what we do." H said, "Okay, is there a tune?" And they said, "Oh no, just make one up." We kind of then got the verses and choruses of that almost off the hoof. That's kind of crazy. According to John Helmer, the idea of the original lyrics was, quote, "to describe various historical events through the eyes of a sort of wanderer, someone present at the various events." However, during the recording of the album, H rewrote the lyrics to focus on then current events in China. He said, "I rewrote the lyrics after the Tiananmen Square murders on the 4th of June. What started out as a mythical idea was overtaken by events, and Deng Xiaoping became main contender for king." He even rhymes. All right, I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Joseph. Let's get after it. The King of Sunset Town. That song was great, right? What a great way to introduce the world to H. And, Rothery didn't even come in with his guitar until 1:56 in. So not only was it a 2.5 minute build, it didn't even have the guitar. So that was a good way to kind of make you go, what's going on here? Right? It does really draw you into the song. Especially being the first song on the album, it makes you sit up and listen because you keep wondering the first time you hear it, when are those vocals going to hit, and you're waiting for the new vocalist. So I thought that was really smart. But the lyrics themselves are fantastic. The musical builds, like all of it is great. And you've got a puppet king on the 4th of June thrown in there, a pretty sight. It seemed to be an avenue of eternal peace. But he said, "Wait, what is here can soon burn down. I'm the king of Sunset Town." They're watching a big wheel turn around. Some go up and some go down, right? The inequality. Some go thirsty, some just drown. "That's the law around here," said the King of Sunset Town. The square becomes a battlefield. So he's got some different things in here. Before the 27th came, the 27th regiment that came and got him. So just a really good song. It's 8 minutes long, and man, it doesn't feel like it at all. Next up, we have Easter. Joseph said when he started working with the band, Steve H brought along a, quote, "red plastic basket full of cassettes and tambourines." This track, still a signature H-era song, emerged from a demo in this bucket. As H explains, quote, "it was a lyric I'd written after I'd been to Ireland and realized that all these troubles that you saw on the TV all the time, that the vast majority of Northern Irelanders wanted to do what the rest of us do, which is to live in peace and bring our kids up. It was a song I've been working on during the closing stages of How We Live. We demoed it together, but we never recorded it properly. Pete adds it's a concise little song, 2 verses, 2 choruses probably, and then we kind of extended it Marillion style with Ian noting we went in and jammed it round, and Steve Rothery went and did this guitar solo, just played it. His first go at it was just magical. Always modest to the extreme, Steve R's take on his now legendary solo was simple. You quote, "You kind of go in and do as good a job as possible. The same way every time I play, that's my whole criteria to put everything possible into every note. I'm not a technically flashy player. What I do is more about emotion and atmosphere, and maybe subtleties of phrasing. Alongside the much lauded electric solo, Nick Davis has also praised Rothery's acoustic contributions, noting that he, quote, won a Best Engineering Award for his work on the track. While some feel this should have been the first single of the H era, we'll get on to what actually was a little bit later. EMI ultimately released it as a belated 3rd single from the album to tie in with Easter of 1990. I mean, you could see that coming, right? Although the single edit eradicated much of the guitar solo, the song managed to reach number 34. Easter, super enjoyed that, and a totally different soundscape, right? Still had great guitar, still had great instrumentation, but H giving a totally different performance and already showing his versatility, right? If you're hearing this for the first time after these first 2 songs, you'd be like, you know what? Marillion is in good shape. Dare I say better shape? I don't know enough about the Fish era compared to the H era, but I love H. And it tells the story of Ireland, out of the port of Liverpool, bound for the north of Ireland, the wash of the spray and horsetail waves, the roll of the sea below, and Easter here again, a time for the blind to see Easter. Surely now can all of your hearts be free. But then, it starts going through, what will you do with the wire and the gun that'll set things right when it's said and done? Will you sleep at night? Is there so much love to hide? Forgive, forget, sing never again. So, forgive, forget, but never again. I just thought that was a nice touch on the songwriting. Next up, we have the Uninvited Guest. And I mean, who wants those, right? Unless some of you people in the RTTC community. Joseph could knock on my door and I'd be like, come on in. But, usually we don't like uninvited guests. Joseph says released as the 2nd single from the album. It broke a long string of top 30 chart entries for the band, Stone at number 53. H noted in 1992 that this song was written within a couple of hours of receiving the lyrics from John Helmer. We loved the lyric as soon as we set eyes on it. I was reminded of John Cooper Clarke by the style and the rhythm. We considered asking JCC to narrate the lyrics on the 12-inch in his own inimitable Manchester drawl, but in the end, we didn't have time to do it. Joseph says, did they really ask him? Let's not forget that Cooper Clarke's former manager dropped him from his roster so he could devote his full time to a then unsigned band called Marillion. See, not only does Joseph have great knowledge, he can tie everything together with Marillion. Then and now, the band saw this as a tongue-in-cheek, lighthearted piece to break up the bleakness of the mood on much of the rest of the album. But Helmer's original inspiration was darker than they perhaps realized, as he revealed in a 1994 interview, quote, it's about AIDS. I read a story of Edgar Allan Poe, Mask of the Red Death, about a rich prince. Plague was spreading on his land, and he decided to organize a party for all his friends, lock himself away from the rest of the world, and let the plague hit the countryside. As soon as the plague had stopped, they would come out of hiding again to continue their normal lives. But when the clock struck midnight, Death, dressed up like a man in a red cape, took him and his friends. I thought that was some sort of a metaphor for the reaction that some people show towards AIDS. Something that can only happen to homosexuals and, quote, other people. If you lock yourself up in an ivory tower, it won't happen to you. A lot of reactions on AIDS were all based on the same feeling, and this feeling led to the Uninvited Guest. He will knock on your door, and your biggest fear is that this is the one thing you don't want to admit happened to you. You just can't believe it can happen to you as well. The only direct indication to this is, I'm the evil in your bloodstream. I'm the rash upon your skin. I'm telling you, man, if you're my age, which I'm almost 52, you lived through, it's still going on, honestly, but the peak of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, it was a scary thing, man. He says it's mainly about the unwanted disturbance of your life, and sentences like 15 stone, first footer, and cuckoo in your nest show the other bits that are based on the same idea. I think for me, it's about the 70s when I was in my teens. There was such sexual freedom. Everything was very easy and free, and you could get experience with everything you wanted. In the 80s, everybody was more controlled and careful, and AIDS was basically the last straw. People were wary about with whom they share their table and bed. People try to hide from all of this by locking themselves in, which gave me spooky images of the Uninvited Guest. As a matter of fact, it could also be you at a party being the person nobody wanted to know. So it definitely wasn't the lighter fare that they thought, right? But it's interesting when you're given a song and you don't ask the songwriter, which sometimes I wouldn't ask him what it's about. I'd rather write the music first. But all right, let's get into it. Well, after the intro to the song, what I read at the start, then you can see it all on here, right? Since you know what it's about. There's just some great lines, I was there when you said insincere I loved you to a woman that wasn't your wife, and I fronted you the money that you ran away and blew on the biggest regret of your life. Because I'm the one who knows what scared you. I'm the one who loves you best. I'm 13th at the table. I'm the uninvited guest. And then I'm the face you hope you never see, but always knew you would. I'm the one thing you knew you shouldn't do, but did because you could. And then we get that I'm the evil in your bloodstream. I'm the rash upon your skin. And you made a big mistake, all right, the day you let me in. You can fly to the other side of the world. You'll only find I've reserved the seat behind you. We can talk about all the time. Like, this song is so well written and just performed. It's a normal Marillion song. Great guitar and everything just works seamlessly. Now up to the title track. Joseph says this was a track that had largely been written by Steve Rothery during the Fish years and been worked up as a demo with lyrics by Fish entitled Biogele Day. Well, you'll enjoy that, Joseph. I butchered that. But he described the final version as, quote, one of the first times you could see the results of the musical chemistry between the five of us. How something like that could grow and be developed and prove to be the template for how we'd end up working in future years. The final lyric was another of John Helmer's submissions. As Mark explains, John Helmer saw a newspaper headline at the time that said something along the lines of, it might never snow again in England. Okay, they got that wrong. But the point is that people knew climate change was happening, and that was more than 30 years ago, and we still haven't gotten to grips with it. That's the depressing thing about it. As I sit here in the summer of 2023, which right now is the hottest year in the history of the world. Let that one sink in. All right, another 8-minute epic. All right, the title track, Seasons In, definitely about the environment. I won't go into all the lyrics. I thought it was a good song, but this is the weakest song for me so far. I thought it kind of had to be that way arrangement-wise because of the subject matter, but it felt a little long to me, and their songs never usually do that. Still a good song, but just so far, when you got to pick, what your faves are, this is probably not going to be one of them, but still a good job. Next up, we have Holloway Girl. Nick Davis recalls, quote, really liking the bass in the intro. I remember being very excited about the sound of Pete's bass on that. Taking a lesson from the Steve Rothery School of Modesty, Pete says, it starts with my bass simply because we wanted a way to get into the song. We wanted a way to get the time without having to have a count in. So messed about with the old pick over the strings. It ends the song as well. It's just a little bookending thing. Bass aside, H expresses reservations about this song now. Quote, that's the song I've got the biggest downer on, even though I probably had the most to do with it. Years earlier, when I was part of the Europeans, we sometimes rehearsed around the corner from Holloway's women's prison. I think prisons are fascinating places, like all alternate societies, and I used to stare up at the walls and watch the gate police. I think I wrote all of that, and I've never really quite been sure about it. I saw a TV program as well as about Holloway Prison. It was really disturbing. A lot of tough girls for sure, but among them, there were women who should have been in mental hospitals, not prison. That was something that I put together in the studio, and they all liked it and wanted to do it. But I have doubts. It's interesting. Holloway Girl, really well done. I thought all of it is well done. Not just the guitar work, we got to talk about the bass, obviously, on this song, but also about, the drumming. Like, all of it just works with Marillion, but you could feel the emotion in there from H. He was playing the song up how he should, and, it's just talking about don't give up hope. He sees the girl with her arm out before the hand of justice, drags her back in, and, it might seem like a mountain to climb, but there's no mountain in this world that hasn't been climbed. So hold out hope, that you can get out of this situation, basically. So I think not just for the Holloway prison women, but also for everyone, it has a nice little message in there. And next up, we have Berlin. Steve Rothery said the intro riff in Berlin was something I wrote maybe sort of 84 or 85. I used to record things on the little cassette players, and I always have this thing where if I play an idea to the band and they don't like it, I just put it to one side, give it a few years, and play it to them again. That's what I did with Berlin, and obviously it became a big chunk of that song. Another song to benefit from the John Helmer lyric, this one was unusual and the subject was suggested to him by the band after they'd worked on the music. As Mark says, we had the music almost complete, arranged, and everything, which is unusual for us. We wouldn't normally write and arrange a whole song with no lyrics because you don't really know where you want the music to go. In a 1989 interview, Steve Rothery said, I didn't tell John anything about recording Misplaced Childhood in Berlin's Hansa studios or anything that happened to us in Berlin. I just said there was a piece of music we'd written that, from my point of view, had been inspired by Berlin. The place has such a strong atmosphere, and I thought it might be nice to do something structured around that. John seemed quite intrigued by that, and he went away and wrote the initial draft of the Berlin lyric. Speaking in 2022, he added, Quote, although I'd never been to Berlin, John encapsulated a lot of what the city was like, especially in the mid-'80s around the time we were there, with the city sort of living on the edge. Speaking in 2022, he added, although he'd never been to Berlin, John encapsulated a lot of what the city was like, especially in the mid-'80s, around the time we were there, with this sort of living on the edge. It's a great lyric. The song also saw the first use of saxophone on a Marillion album, although Nick Davis struggles to recall exactly how that came about. Did we know that we needed a sax solo? I definitely worked with Phil Todd and thought, oh, he's a good sax player. It would have been me who suggested it, but I just might have suggested him rather than saxophone. I can't remember if we had a hole where we meant to be a sax solo, or there was just meant to be something, and I said saxophone. Rothery adds, obviously Floyd used saxophone on a lot of their classic records, but for us, it's a bit of a departure, a bit of widening of what this band can represent, which obviously we continued with various records since. You know you're not looking to reinvent yourself, but just to add new dimensions to what you do. I thought that's a great quote. All right, Berlin, which, you know, when you understand the background of the song that Joseph gave, but if you were alive during this time, you know, and remember the difference in, you know, East Germany and West Germany, and people in East Germany under communist rule trying to escape to West Germany, this song takes on all kinds of different meanings, right? It's either about a girl that just kind of gets around, a prostitute, or a stripper. I mean, part of it makes you think she's a stripper, but either way, it's just kind of telling you all these things that are going on, coming to some double meanings between her and then the spotlight that was on the wall, right? But then at the end, we get the butcher, the baker, the munitions maker, the overachiever, the armistice breaker, all these different things. The black market mailer, the quick, and the end, the spotlight dancer, the quick and the dead, we wake up without you with a hole in our hearts. So, you know, if they tried to escape, they were shot and killed. There were no questions asked. So, yeah, that was a different world, although the world we live in now has definitely its own set of problems. All right, we still got 3 songs left. We got After Me. Joseph says, right before we get into this one, I have to explain this personal significance of the song. This song came into my life around the same time my second boyfriend left it. He took his own life a week before his 23rd birthday. And the two have remained permanently linked for me, especially the Stray Dog verse, which feels written about us. 15 years later, and I still can't get through that section or even read the lyrics without the old eyes watering. But they're mostly happy tears for the time we did have together. That said, I'm glad this is one of the few H-era songs I've not seen them do live. If I did, I don't know. If I didn't know it was coming, it might be very well leave me a complete wreck. I can see that. Anyway, as with Going Under on Clutching at Straws, this was originally the B-side for the first single, See the Next Track, and wasn't included on the original vinyl pressing. It was always on the CD. H explains that it was, quote, it's really about the missus, about how little time we were spending together, about how little of me she was getting. I'd started to feel bad about that, but After Me was a little bit of a nod to her, that I was aware of what it was all costing us. Mark describes it as, quote, a typical of the sort of things that he got into writing once he'd been in the band for a while. I think they're quite personal lyrics because it's a short little acoustic song. It tends to get a bit overlooked, but I think it's a really nice song. All right, After Me, I mean, I felt the chilling part on the Stray Dogs after Joseph shared what he did because I was just thinking about that story. I really like this song. I think the acoustic part of it just works great. I mean, H has got a great voice, and I like the way they build it out at the end and kick in the full instrumentation, but nicely arranged and just a really well-written song. Just shows you the diversity already of Marillion in the H era, right? Just on this album, 7 songs in, so much diversity, but don't worry, we still got 2 left. We got Hooks in You. Joseph says, completely uncharacteristic of the band, and especially of the album. This fun 3-minute rockers remain a controversial entry in the Marillion canon, especially given its significance as the first H-era single. And therefore the first thing most people had actually heard from the new lineup, even ahead of The Kiss of Sunset Town as the single came out, a month ahead of the album, because that's how we used to do it, boys and girls. In the streaming era, sometimes 4 or 5 songs will come out before the album does, and it's like, it kills the drama of the album, but I digress. As Mark says, quote, you hear different things. Some people say it's not what they want to hear from Marillion. Some people are like, that's the first song I heard with H singing. I loved it. I've been a fan ever since. Pete's take is that, quote, we were trying to be Van Halen, I think, for a day, and Steve Rothery was messing about with this little riff, and we were like, well, that's actually really good. As H explains it now, I was outside of the studio at the Mushroom Farm. The door was shut, and I could hear them jamming. And I thought, what a great riff. That's a phenomenal riff. And I kicked the door in and went, wait. In 1992, he noted he'd been perusing a fax from the ever-creative John Helmer, and there was this line, when the fear gets a hook in you, The song unfolded in my head right there and then, and in about an hour, we had the basic structure nailed. We all wondered whether it was too straight ahead, but I always liked its attitude. You have to listen to it loud, really. Back to the present day, and H says, quote, it seemed obvious to me that it was quite a commercial song, and unsurprisingly, when the A&R folk at EMI heard it, they were all, oh, this has to be the first single. If Easter had been the single, it might have been a clear statement about where the band was going to go, but whether anyone would have heard it is another thing. Whether radio would have played it, I don't know. Well, not hugely successful in the charts. It did reach number 30 and also ensured the band had the opportunity to showcase a new frontman on top of the pops. All right, Hooks in You. Like, that song is fine, but it doesn't for me, and I don't know a ton of Marillion, but I know some now. Like Joseph has educated me, and I like everything I hear from them. It doesn't seem to me to be them so much, but you do get Rothery's great guitar work, and you see the power of H in there in his vocals. So it's not a bad song at all. It's just, it's different for them. I don't know what I think of it. I mean, if it wasn't Marillion, you just played it for him, I go, yeah, it's a good song. So, I mean, it's a good song, but I can see why it was a little controversial and a very interesting choice for the first single, but probably not bad because you do want to get on top of the pops. You do want to make the top 30 to ensure that you have a chance to make the other music. So I can see that. And last but certainly not least, we have The Space. And we have H with a little quote here. I once saw an Amsterdam tram rip the side off a parked car which had been left too near the tram lines. It did so without slowing down. In terms of mass, the competition was so one-sided, like a ball bearing in a feather, that I often wonder whether the tram driver noticed it happen. The damage was massive, inevitable, and casual. It's an enduring memory. I have occasionally been the tram, and I've often been the car. Amen to that, man. That's H's explanation of the inspiration behind the opening verse of a song that the band clearly loved, to the point that a review from 1989 in which the song was labeled as overworked guff still galls them. They all acknowledge that it's utterly ridiculous for this to be the case, but it still is, and that's despite the fact that the reviewer in question, John Houghton, who, to be fair, gave a rave review of the rest of the album, has since apologized. He also played guest tambourine on 2008's Happiness is the Road album, badly by all accounts. But Pete simply says now, quote, we still play it live, and it's still a showstopper. While Ian recalls, the first time I heard the end section, I thought, wow. The thing with H is, throughout his whole career with Marillion, with his lyrics, with his vocals and performance, it's always 100% honest. It really is. All right, let's finish this thing out. All right, The Space. Basically just saying, he describes the tram incident, and then the space around the stars is something that you know, a billion miles of darkness left you feeling low. The space around the stars is something that you know, everything about you so perfectly restrained, but everything inside you bites you. Everybody in the whole of the world feels the same inside. So the way H sings that was a great way to finish this off, because I thought everybody was clicking on all cylinders, right? The build, I mean, H on the vocals, of course, Rothery on the guitars. It just all built, Ian on the drums, who I haven't mentioned yet, but a really good way to finish this album out. That's going to take me to my favorite tracks. Honorable mention, The Uninvited Guest. Berlin, got to put it on there for that saxophone in there, right? In this last song, The Space, I was back and forth on that. Should be a fave or honorable mention. Fave's going to be the first song, The King of Sunset Town. I think it might be my fave. I don't know. Easter and After Me, like the acoustic genius of that and the great songwriting. Now we'll go to my overall score. Joseph says, so show-stopping masterpiece or overworked guff? You be the judge. Then we'll be back in October for an episode entitled Marillion Goes Pop, with H-Era album number 2, Holidays in Eden. So look forward to that if you're watching this in live time. I think this album's really good, and I really like Marillion music, so then I got to try to kind of go, I got to be objective and not subjective. So am I making the score too high because I enjoy the music? That's something in my chair you've always got to try to balance, and I think I do a pretty good job of that, because I rate some albums I never listen to again sky high, and some albums that I love lower, but I got to be at an 8.0 on this. So I don't know, Marillion fans, am I off on this? Are the next 4 going to be better? Was this not what I think it is? But let me know below. Thank you to Joseph, as always, for bringing this one. Give me a thumbs up if you would on the video. It helps out. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We're almost at 2,500 vids. Sounds insane, because it is. All right, guys, until next time, I will see you.